have some on your end, but I actually will bite into a piece of this right now. Anyway, Prague needs some energy, and yeah, he's got to turn it around because getting frozen, not just losing, but the last two ways he lost, really being frozen, can't feel good right now.
No, and I'm going to be completely honest. A win like that feels like more than 1 point. It's a demoralizing victory for the opponent, demoralizing loss rather, and it just really empowers you. If you ever put your opponent in a position like that, Danny, you've really outplayed them. Like it's a different type of victory. So I know the score is 2.5, 1.5, but having been in a couple of those positions, especially for someone who I consider a bit more of an active defender like Prague, that's a very tough spot to be. And he is certainly going to be trying to play in a way where, yes, he might have to defend or play from his back foot, but he never wants to be in that spot ever again.
Yeah. Like you said, not all losses feel the same. That's a loss that is definitely frustrating. But to remind everybody of how we got to the score, the one win Prague had felt probably equally as frustrating for Fabi. It wasn't a full sort of borderline zugzwang of being frozen, but it was dominant for Prague, and Black was completely destroyed in the end. So Prague just needs to find that juice again, and try to bring this thing back to even.
Yeah, and we have this sort of a double fianchetto setup here. This is something that can get back into a Maroczy structure with pawn to e4, but usually the indication with queen captures on d4 is that the queen will move as it has, and usually the e-pawn will stay at home so that the diagonal is open, and you get these ideas like bishop h6, like knight g5, in the future knight d5 to hopefully distract that f6 knight. And, you know, it's kind of a tame start here, but there are some real attacking ideas.
Yeah, it's funny because it started out as an English opening, and you often real tactics here. The bishop is undefended, so if a discovered attack happens in a dangerous way, things could fall apart quickly. Right now, Black is safe, in large part because of this second knight, which guards this f6 knight. So you're not really worried that much about tactics here, but you do have to be careful. By the way, rook c5, what a fun move there. Meet a queen lift with a rook lift.
Yeah, rook c5 is a great move. It's actually an entirely thematic idea in this exact opening. So I was glad we were able to see that on the board from Prague. The idea, as you're pointing out, rook h5, which required a decision or some sort of action with that bishop on h6. It's not the preferred course here for Fabi. You don't want to take on g7 and have the king take. You want to take back on h6. So that's not what he wanted at all. And rook c5 forced that out of him.
Yeah, not ideal for Fabi as far as keeping the attack goes. I love the queen and bishop battery. Even if it doesn't amount to anything, can we just applaud how pretty that looks on the log diagonal? Question is whether Fabi wants to simplify it and trade or figure out something else to do. Maybe get the queen out of being on the king side since the attack is no longer really working.
Yeah, queen to a8 also allows the rook from f8 to slide over to c8. And remember, when you have this pawn on c4, whether you get a pawn on e4 for white or not, you still, as Black, have the same sort of breaks in the structure. It's always d5 and b5 to look out for. So those are the two pawn breaks that we're going to be expecting at some point, and, you know, build up towards it with a6, b5, or maybe even d5 very directly. Might even be possible here, although I wouldn't do it with the pin on the f6 knight.
Yeah. Well, a6, b5 is what the doctor ordered, Dr. Aman in the house, and it is played. White can play a4 if you want to overprotect it and slow it down a little bit. Okay, knight a4 gains a tempo on the rook, and if it moves to the wrong square, white will just gather this pawn. So that's a tricky move to respond to. Are you really going to put the rook on c6? That feels scary.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit strange. The thing about knight a4 is it's always a temporary move because Black has a great move, b5. But obviously we can't play it because the rook is hanging. We have this pawn to worry about. So rook a5 is the answer. And I mean, with a2 hanging, I guess this does work. And remember that knight on f3 doesn't really have anywhere useful to go because of the pressure on the bishop behind it.
It's so funny, and there hasn't been a big swing of eval bar, so as awkward as these moves look, they probably were the best moves according to the computer. And okay, Fabi decides to take it, which is going to get an exchange that Aman just called for, a2 for b6 in the end. with an immediate retreat of the queen where she's guarding the pawns and attacking e7. The position is roughly level.
Yeah, and it's really strange to have this rook on a2. This is almost like a study. I would look at this position and think to myself, how did the rook get on a2? There's no open file at all.
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. How did the rook get to a2, everybody? You have to come up with the path if you didn't know the game. Okay, well, now the rook is probably going to trade on a2. And even though the computer says it's even, given the direction of the game, I'm kind of liking what Fabi's doing. Just because a6 is weak, it feels like you have a 2-on-1 majority, though it's not really that clear. Although the more I think about it, maybe b3 is just as weak as a6, is what Pragg would say, and the position is equal for a reason.
Yeah, I think from some experience playing, not this exact position, but these type of fianchetto or double fianchetto positions, I think what we're looking at is generally a big achievement for black. Anytime you have this, it's likely that the a-pawn will trade for something. Like you're not just going to lose the a-pawn. So your goal is maybe to win the b-pawn or win the e-pawn. And if you can ever get rid of the a-pawn for something, the resulting structure, almost no matter what, is going to be preferred because it's just such a solid, d6 to h7 pawn chain. So I think this is something, especially with all the pieces traded, that Pragg is very happy about. The knight will slide into the c5 square, whether it's d7, c5, or recapturing on e4. So I'm feeling like it's, yes, about equal, but normally if you're equalizing in this way with black, you've achieved something.
No, it's really well said. And if b3 falls, c4 will become the weakest pawn on the board. And to Amon's point, if both c4 and b3 are the ones that fall for a6, again, because this pawn makes this pawn weak, Fabi doesn't like that endgame because black can win this 5-on-4. Often we think when pawns are on one side of the board, it's going to be a draw. But don't take your eye off the ball, because knight endings and knights and rook together in particular, you can convert and win those endgames. So to that point, Fabi is not interested in losing the b3 pawn.
Yeah, rook a3 guarding, and I'm looking at queen b4 because we should be looking at queen b4. It hits the rook and it hits the knight on e1, so it's a very simple fork. And after that move, there's no knight c2. There is queen c1, which keeps everything protected, because we're probably not going to be playing rook back to a1.
Yeah, and if you did, you'd lose b3 and we'd get those lines. So yeah, I think your queen c1, what a weird move to have to play, but I think you're right. If queen b4 is on the board, we probably will see queen to c1. And somehow Fabi's actually holding everything, right? It doesn't look good, but white is still solidly defending.
And I think that's also why we saw bishop takes g2, because the knight on e1, if the bishops were exchanged without the knight having to recapture, I think that knight would rather go to d3. Maybe c2, but d3 looks like a great square. It supports b4, maybe even supports moving pawn to b4. And then the action goes to the a-pawn, which becomes weak. So instead, the knight looks not as good on the g2 square.
Yeah. Okay, interesting exchange offer here from Pragg. Of course, if you take the white queen gone, meaning black is getting the plan Amon talked about, a knight heading over here is probably just going to be great for black. So if you're white, you really don't want to trade and let the knight in. You'd almost rather play f3 and allow black to trade, so that in the end you're guarding this e4 square. To your point, the knight would much rather be over here helping the problems, not sitting on g2 and just looking at them. Yeah,
and queen b1 it's a pretty nice looking move at the moment, because there's nowhere for you've almost back rank mated yourself with this fianchetto knight, which is why it's just not good. So h3 is played. Okay, you're controlling the square there on g4, but I think it's just a little bit more safe of a move than f3. Although if we could guarantee black would exchange the queens, then I do prefer your f3 move for the endgame. But I think it might have been queen b1 that kept it a little bit dicey.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, of course, if you play queen b1, the king goes to h2. There's no fork. The pawn guards it. Okay, you're going for the plan, but I think in the end, Fabi was thinking he'll get knight d5 with a tempo. Maybe the knight is headed to c7. So we're about to get some forcing exchanges where I think a number of weak pawns are going to leave the board for good.
And we need to see, I mean, if knight c5 happens here on the very next move, that might just be a win, because you're going to win the b pawn and you're not going to lose the a pawn. So knight c5 is a massive threat at the moment. And it means we're either going to see rook takes a6 or knight d5. Okay, knight c2 in order to play b4 is another way to do it. But yeah, I think it had to be actually very careful there as Fabi.
Yeah, knight c2 is it's a defensive move. You're meeting knight to c5 with b4, and at least then the a6 pawn falls. So again, it's holding with passive moves, but it is accurate so far. Otherwise, the computer would have been yelling us over here on that eval bar. So still roughly level, and Pragg can't forget that his pawn is also hanging.
Yeah, there's a reason that we're looking at around an equal position here. But I will say, with time starting to become a factor, look at this. If you lose the A pawn for the B pawn, that's kind of the structure I've been talking about from the start. It benefits black. So Fabi's desperately trying to not allow that and, play F3, bring his king into the game, kick the knight, and then go after the A6 pawn.
Just so funny to see the knight go to A1 and applaud, because the knight on A1 is defending everything perfectly. The pawn now guards the knight's escape, and the king's coming in. Again, Pragg's not losing the knight. You can always play knight B1 with a tempo and get out to C3, but wait, you have to be super careful here, because there are ideas where the knight gets trapped.
But you're not getting your knight C3. Following your thoughts there, Danny, you're not getting out. And by the way, I'm playing king E1, not king E3, so that I don't allow knight F1. And then the knight's going to go to B1, and yeah, you really are going to get trapped.
Yeah, he plays rook A2 first. King F2. King F2 actually would have trapped the knight, I think, by force, or force some sort of awkward move. So Pragg has underestimated what could happen to his knight.
A5, A4? Oh, I don't know about that move.
Sitting tight.
A5, A4 is going to free the knight. That was a little bit of a miss by Fabi. He rushed it. He rushed the idea. He knew the idea, but he didn't have to go that quick.
Yeah. Well, I just don't understand why he didn't follow F3 with King F2 right away. And again, obviously these guys are playing very high-level chess with low time, but it would seem that after F3, King F2 is the next... Did he just blunder? He just mouse slip?
Oh my goodness. What?
He just mouse slip. Oh my god.
And that's a crazy mouse slip, because it's like one of those things where the mouse was just kind of loose on the screen.